Hey, ATG coaches. I would like to give you a little introduction on one of the topics that I really passionately like to integrate into my training, that I like to research, and that I think is highly underestimated. And that is locomotion. Now, locomotion can be approached as a very broad topic of anything that's locomoting, meaning moving from one position to another position. But in this context, want to talk more about this more narrow field of locomotion that's quite common in the so-called movement culture. That's also used in a lot of martial arts for warming up, in gymnastics and parkour. That is essentially most of the time quadrupedal locomotion, meaning on all fours, or even going for like a duck walk, in like a squat position, walking like in a squat. All of these locomoting patterns that are a little different than the normal locomotion, being running, jumping, sprinting, swimming, cycling. So the reason why I would like to shine more light on this topic is that through different disciplines, I got different perspectives on locomotion, but most of them used them for warming up, for injury prevention and conditioning. And I would say that was definitely quite successful. And I still believe, due to the character of locomotion being so minimalistic, you essentially most of the time need nothing else than a flat space to travel through. You can use it perfectly for group sports, for bigger groups, for minimalistic workouts, even like the zero programs. So that's why I would like to introduce you to this topic. Now, the interesting thing with locomotion that I see is that when we have linear movement patterns, meaning like up and down, like a push-up, like a split squat, like a lunge, all of these movements, they're more or less stationary. We mainly move in one direction and have a very linear work. Now, what's very interesting that I find in locomotion is that most of the time we have a basic position that we're locomoting through. So as an example, in the bear walk, or the quadrupedal walk, in this position, I'm essentially having something like a bent knee plank, or like a kind of like a plank position where I'm having some pelvic tilt involved, some core engagement, some scapular protraction, straight arm strength. I'm loading my wrists. But the very interesting thing is, as I'm moving around, traveling back and forth, I'm, as an example, changing the angle in my shoulder. So when I'm here and I'm stepping my foot and I want to stabilize myself with my hand in front of me, then I'm actually engaging a little bit of my shoulder extensors, like I'm pressing down on the floor to hold myself. While if I'm backwards like this, I'm engaging more my shoulder flexors, my chest and shoulder. The second thing that I find very interesting is that when we're looking at things like joint stability, meaning we want to get a joint in a certain position, stabilize it, most of the time it's more stationary. So if I play in some protraction, if I'm trained some protraction shrugs, this one in a plank, I'm sinking in, I'm pressing out. I do it in a very linear motion. Now, if I want to do it in a more dynamic motion, let's say I want to now train only this angle, then the interesting thing is with locomotion that if I do steps, with every step that I'm traveling like forward, my hand moves down, and at least I'm having a far bigger range of motion that I'm training. And then if we're going to add to this one that usually isometric training radiates, we can say that instead of having this position, and we're going like 15 degrees up and 15 degrees down in range of motion that we're also going to work. Now, if I have this already dynamically, then I have 15 degrees more to the top and 15 degrees more to the bottom. So I'm actually training something like 45 to 60 degree range of motion just by crawling. And what's very important, if I do small steps like this, it will be very different to if I do steps like this. But this is my transition to the next topic, which is the scalability. Most locomotion patterns can be scaled through the way we are going to do them, and we're like using them. So essentially, I just want to give you an example, which is let's go for something very simple. If simple meaning like it's not easy, but it's simple. If I'm in this position and I'm leaning myself forward and I'm jumping forward, what I'm actually going to do is I'm holding myself in a position that's very common in gymnastics as the pike hold, pike over. It's essentially base position for press to handstand. It's essentially being here and having the legs float in the air. This is the position. That's the position I'm traveling through. Now, what's very interesting is as I'm traveling forward, I'm sinking into the position. So every rep I'm doing is an eccentric I'm doing more like eccentric press work. So I'm training my press, my overhead strength, my shoulder flexion strength in eccentric fashion, which makes it easy and kind of a regression. If I'm going to do the same movement pattern, but now I'm traveling backwards, same thing, I'm placing my hands down and I'm doing this one, now I do a concentric movement, my arms have to push me backwards. So if I want to benefit from purely concentric or purely eccentric training, as Ben Patrick is using it for the reverse walking, reversing out knee pain, backwards walking, sled pulls, all of the stuff, locomotion is so interesting because we can, for nearly any part of the body, by just finding a nice base position and then either moving forward or backward, we can get into a concentric or eccentric only movement pattern for that area. This is the next important thing that I really like and enjoy, because I noticed that whenever I trained locomotion in more complex and like as a basic routine, it's part of my warm-up, very much like the ROKP in the warm-up, I did things for my shoulders, and back then my shoulders were nearly bulletproof. Now in the last year, due to the lockdown, all of this, I wasn't really, I wasn't aware of it, but I also wasn't going to gymnastics places. They were all closed, so I didn't do my usual locomotion training. And through the last year, I ran into multiple issues with my back, with my shoulder girdle that I wasn't experiencing for decades, or like a decade now, many years. Imagine the first time I did locomotion was when I was like 12, 13 years old as a young gymnast. Until now, this is the first time I'm not doing them, and I'm experiencing some really annoying shoulder issues that are always coming back. It's just anecdotal, but it's something that I found very interesting. As I started integrating more locomotion patterns again, my shoulder improved. And I would definitely attribute this to the fact that locomotion has this character. So essentially, what the reverse walking can be for my quads and knees could be something like a reverse locomotion like this for my front shoulder as its inner range shoulder flexion. If I want to do something for my posterior shoulder, I could do something like a tabletop walk. So I'm going into a tabletop position, and then I'm going to walk like this, really focusing on pressing my arms into shoulder extension. Now I have my inner range work. What's so interesting with this thing is that I can scale the range extremely easy, because this chest up is a very tough high end range that's fully making my tricep cramp, my bicep fully stretched, while if I'm more like this, it's easier. So I can simply regress all of my locomotion in such a simple way. This is one of the benefits that I see in locomotion, that instead of using more or less weight, we can change the intensity of a movement through range of motion that we're working in, just by changing body positions, through speed, both being extremely fast being harder, but also if you go very slow, but also do like with very simple things like weight shifting. Now, you can test this one on your own. You can place your hands on a scale, do this, and then just lean backwards. And you will notice that your hands will have to carry more and more and more weight that you can see as a number on the scale as you're doing this one. So if I'm traveling like this, most of my load is on my feet. But if I'm leaning back like this and I'm traveling like this, my hamstrings are nearly cramping. So I have some inner range, mid to inner range hamstring work, as they have to support me, but also my long head of my tricep, my posterior shoulder, and my trapezius has to fully work in the inner range. So this is a huge benefit of this movement pattern, that I can scale it that easy just by leaning, make it as tough as possible, and as I'm exhausting and it's too tough, I can just lean more forward to make it easier. So this simple movement pattern can be a perfect warm-up for warming up your hamstrings. You will really feel them pulling and working in not the fully inner range, but it's already close to their inner range, as well as you will have the full inner range of your tricep, especially the long head of the tricep, as I said it before, posterior head of the shoulder, all of this musculature. So this simple movement, those two movement patterns can be scaled indifferently, easier as well as harder. I mean, the toughest thing you could do, that I'm always saying, is like you could do something like reverse walking press to handstands. So you could place your hands, press up, come down, next press. And this would be like the toughest way to do it that you could get to by just training this movement pattern. So the same thing could work for this one. Every step that you're doing, I'm going to now show you the tougher way. Instead of doing this walk, you could do something like a V-sit locomotion it's not anymore the full end range, but it's still close to the end range. You definitely feel your tricep working, rear shoulders cramping. And then you can go from like tuck walks to V-sit shifts. And on those, you can simply scale them again. If you want to make it easier, instead of moving forward, you can move backwards. If you want to make them tougher through changing the leverage by, for example, extending the knees, you can train your rectus femoris inner range, hip compression, shoulder extension, and it's extremely simple to scale. So this is essentially it's not really a pitch, but these examples should show you how easy you can scale a lot of locomotion. And those are just the basics. I can give you 100 examples for opening up your sides, for doing lateral locomotion, for lower leg locomotion. You can do all of these patterns where, for example, if you want to open up your hips, you do these like Cossack shifts, go in like a Cossack or drop stance, shift into a horse stance, shift to the other side. Then you can do something like you cross your legs, change the position, reach out, shift again, shift, cross, turn. There are multiple, like so many ways to train locomotion for any part of the body. I think it's just that no one did the research that I accidentally did over the years because I really enjoyed this topic. And it was so low cost, low equipment that I just did the work. So this is like a basic pitch for locomotion series. I would say everyone would definitely benefit of adding something either to their athletes, because it's so low cost, doesn't need anything. Add it to your own training, research it. There's so many more technological advances with this one. So let's say you can, instead of going for like a contralateral, crossing the legs, you can go to an ipsilateral. Instead of going contra, reverse side, back and forth, even sideways. You can also go ipsilateral, using the same side. You can also go same side sideways. You can go longitudinal, meaning hand, feet together. There's so many ways to perform this movement, these movements, and completely change the effect of the human body. And I would like to introduce you to this whole topic.